Any more questions? Comments? Mr. Omar?
I guess my only question wouldn't be to staff, but just to you as far as how you'd like to proceed with our discussion, because I think what was outlined there was that there's clearly two different short-term action items that we're going to try and perhaps check off this evening.
Right.
And I don't know if you want to maybe just tackle one at a time, or what would your suggestion
yes,
be?
I think we would tackle the one action near-term action item on the mayor in May. If we decide, do we want to pursue that, or
do you want to tackle that one first? Or
let's tackle that one first.
Okay.
Any comments?
I do.
Mr. Omar?
I'd be happy to start. I think clearly the city's been, blessed, and we've done a really, really good job with our mayors, and we've been very fortunate to have a series of really great leaders. And I think that, the thing that's probably made this a bigger issue in recent times has really just been the way residents interact with us. And I think, those who have been on the council a lot longer, if you asked maybe John Murphy or Gary Slagle, they'd probably tell you that, when they first started on council 20 years ago compared to their last 2 or 4 years, there was a dramatic difference in how much citizen input, whether it was text messages or Twitter or people were emailing them. Many of those things obviously didn't even exist early in those careers, and so I think we see more and more resident input to us, and I think that we see voters all over the place that just want to have a little bit more say in the way certain things go. And I think that clearly, to me at least, extends to the selection of mayor. One of the things that really shocked me in my first election in 2009 was the number of times that I got asked when I was running for city council, the number of times I got asked who I was going to vote for mayor. And I thought that was kind of an interesting thing, because really what I wanted to do was talk about, why I'd be a decent council person. But the focus was really on something that it was the only way that resident could control it, was to ask who you were going to vote for mayor. And in some cases, I would go so far as to say that there were some people, whatever the number is, that voted for me or voted against me based on who they thought I was going to select as mayor at that time. And I just think, quite frankly, it's a desperate situation that people find themselves in when they have to vote that way. But it's the only way that they can have a say in the mayor's seat, essentially, when it's all said and done. And, I guess thankfully it worked out for me. But in the end, I'd much rather see our residents be able to speak directly to who they'd like to see as mayor, as well as be able to select council members based on the merits of the council person, and not based on what the very first decision that council person is going to make, a week after their election. I'm just going to add one more thing here, and then I'll stop, and if maybe there'll be a chance to say a few other things. But I do think that this is a dramatically more competitive environment today than it ever has been before when it comes to the different cities. We see that with the way companies are looking at relocations and incentives and everything else. And I think that back when we first did this in the early days when we chose this form of government, I think it made a lot of sense because it was kind of a ceremonial position. And it was something that really came down to just someone that could run the meeting and hopefully do so efficiently. And I think the difference now is that you see that that when you do have an opportunity to have that, if you had a mayor's election, you would have the ability to actually vet the candidate specifically as mayor, as opposed to, let's say, looking at a council person and who they're running against and thinking who the best council person would be. You don't have the ability today to kind of look at someone and say, okay, which of those two would be the best mayor, or 4 or 5 or however many people were running for the position. And yet we get to do that in every other elected position. So from my perspective, I think the value of vetting someone to be the mayor really would like the opportunity and will take that opportunity however they find it, even if it means selecting the council person that they think might select the mayor that they like. So with that, I'll kind of sit back and listen to what everyone has to say, and we can go from there.
Okay, any more questions, comments? Ms. Maczka?
Well, since we're looking at these separately, I have to say from my perspective, I can't really look at them separately. And I know that the short-term action item is to get this on the May ballot. And I got to tell you, I don't think that it's as simple as just saying we're going to directly elect the mayor. I think if we're going to go down that path, we're going to have to look at everything. We're going to have to look at the districting. We're going to have to look at the way we do business. And so I think if we're going to do that, we need to give it the due diligence that it's deserved. And to me, that's looking at the charter. And like I said, I just think it's more complicated than saying, let's choose the mayor. That's my perspective.
Oh,
Mr. Omar?
So I don't know if we are going to speak about them separately or we're going to speak about them together. I think there's already 2 that have said that they'd like to speak about them together. And I think at the end of the day, if we do both of these things justice, we do it justice by getting to a point where, you know, we say where we're going to end up on these things ultimately. I think, first of all, as far as, you know, carving out one item, we've done that in the past. We did it in 2007 under Mayor Mitchell, and we had, you know, 3 items including term limits. And I think it would have been very easy if, you know, since at that time there wasn't a desire to go ahead and create a charter review commission, they made decisions on things that they thought were important to go ahead and do it. And looking at the voting totals, it looks like they must have gotten it pretty close to right, because I think it was like 70% and above for each of the propositions that were put out there. You know, one of the things that wasn't mentioned here, and I don't know if we know off the top of our head how many cities that there are in Texas that are this way. Do you happen to know that answer off the top of your head, or is that?
How many cities select the mayor from within? Mm-hmm. There was a TML report that was published that indicated that there were 6% of Texas cities have the mayor is selected from among the council members. Nationwide, that report cited 35%.
Okay. So, you know, I think one of the things that we've got to look at also is that the size of the city and how, you know, how as cities mature and they get to a certain size, how that transfer has gone. And I know, you know, Councilman Dunn mentioned that there have been problems in other cities, but I think some of that is the city's just the attitude and even the personalities of the city. We've got a personality in Richardson of working together, and I don't know that that's necessarily a byproduct of whether we select or elect a mayor. I just think that's the personality of the city, and one that our residents expect of us, and one that, you know, that we'd like to be able to carry on. There have been, you know, at least dozens, and my guess is hundreds of cities. I know the city of Dallas is among many that were once run in the way that we run our city as it relates to election versus selection. And to my knowledge, at least again with any of the bigger cities that were once the way we do it and are now at a direct election, I haven't seen any of them that have gone back and changed their charter to say, you know, this was a real disaster and we ought to go back to the other way. As a matter of fact, my guess is that most of those cities would see a revolt if something like that happened, because, you know, I think, again, the residents like the idea of being able to have their voice heard on the mayor's election. So, you know, one of the things that we talked about earlier was it's an integrated piece and it's a lot more complicated and all that. You know, I look at, and I can't remember, Bill, can you help me with what number it is? Is it? There was so much talk of 4.01 that I got stuck on that. 302. So, so you know, my understanding is that if, and I don't know where we're going to end up on the Charter Review Commission, so I can, since we're only going to take this one first, under the assumption that we don't do anything with the Charter Review Commission, and that may or may not be a good assumption, but if we don't, the ability to just change Section 3.02, and all you're doing is changing the fact that after a brand new elected council, which, mind you, could include 7 people, and it's happened before in our history, so it's not that outlandish, brand new people on the council that are then, after 1 week after winning, then have to figure out which one of them is going to be mayor with no experience and no vetting of any mayor or anyone as mayor. That can happen. And so 3.02 would simply say, hey, all we're going to do is change that one aspect of what we do on the selection and instead just have that individual get elected. You could choose at this point, if we choose not to do a charter review commission or another kind of charter review, you could choose at this point to just simply say we're going to amend 3.02. We're going to elect instead of select that one person, and we're not going to change any of the other duties. No additional powers, no additional ability to do anything else, still the same voting rights, still everything else the same. So I don't know that it's really all that much more complicated than we decide to make it. And from my perspective, if we think our system is set up well and the mayor shouldn't have any more power and all that, then there really isn't anything else in the charter that needs to be changed other than just a few words in 3.02 that says that the person gets elected, and we'd have to decide which one of our jobs to eliminate to create a position where the mayor would actually run in that particular seat, and the rest would take care of itself.
So you're proposing keeping 7 districts, but one of them being mayors. That's what you're saying.
I think that for simplicity's sake, and the big caveat here, and I'm not necessarily saying that I think we shouldn't have a charter review commission, but what I am saying is if in the second discussion we decide not to do a charter review commission, we could very simply, just like in 2007, we could very simply say we're just going to adjust the words in 3.02 and perhaps eliminate one of the at-large positions, since we've got 4 districts that we would remain the same. You'd eliminate one of the at-large, and you'd say if someone wants to run for mayor, they run in that particular spot, and then the rest goes from there. I mean, all the rest of the powers, all the rest of the duties, everything else remains the same, and nothing else would change. It's a simple fix if we decide to fix it. And then if we do a charter review commission one day, whether it's now because we decide in the second half of this conversation or 5 years from now or whenever, then if we want to adjust the powers of the mayor, if you think there should be more or less or whatever, or more definition, we could do all that then. But until the point where we feel comfortable with a commission or some other way to change the charter, I think we could very easily change this one thing in 3.02.
Mr. Mayor, since Mr. Sullivan's now jumped right into the charter discussion, can I make a suggestion? Because basically, the short-term action item clearly says, decide in term for a May election. I think we should vote. Do we, the 7, want to have the direct election of the mayor resolved tonight in order to have it on the May ballot? Well, no, we can actually vote. We've gotten the legal that during a work session we can actually do a vote. So what I would like to see is let's put that one to rest. It may resurface in the conversation about the charter, but let's go ahead and get that action item taken care of, because I'll be honest, I'm going to say it again, I don't think it's as simple, because what place is it? I mean, which one of us is going to give up our seat?
Place 7.
Okay, well, then you can vote how you want to.
Well, it's numerically, I'm just saying it's numerically at the end of the line, so you could take it off 7 or you could take it off, put it at place 1, whichever one.
Okay, well, so that will weigh in your decision to vote. And again, I just think that kind of to Mr. Mitchell's point, the way I view us is a board of trustees. And I think one of the hardest things that I as a council person have had to kind of come to, I guess, get my feet under me is what is the role of the Board of Trustees? And that is vision, goals, things like that. It is not the day-to-day operations. And I think in that level, as a Board of Trustees, most corporations, most boards elect their chairman from within. Now, I'm not saying that we won't look at some of these other things, but I just don't think we can pull it out and have it on the May vote. So I would move that we vote on the short-term action item of having this on the May ballot. Okay. Yes, sure.
For me personally, I would not be in support of making this change.
Maczka, you want to make a motion then?
Sure. I move that we cease discussion on the short-term action item, election versus selection of mayor, review in time for May 2012 ballot consideration.
Have a second. Have a motion by Ms. Maczka, second by Mr. Hartley. Any discussion on the motion?
I'd like to have some discussion.
Yes, Mr. Omar.
So I'm just going to make a final point, and then we'll make our vote. But I got to imagine, and I could be wrong on this, and I'd love to know. But if this was on the ballot, let's just hypothetically say this was on the ballot, whether it be May or November or sometime in the future. But for the sake of this particular discussion, if it was on the ballot in May, 3.02, a couple simple changes, specifically, instead of selecting, that you would use the word elect, and that you would put it in place 1 or place 7 or place 10 or whatever you want to call it. I believe strongly that the measure would pass 85, maybe even 90. It might break the record for the best charter change in approval in Richardson history. And I think that a number of us feel like we represent, the residents of Richardson, and to a great degree that a part of our job, obviously, is to weigh what we think the residents of the city would like to see. Now, residents of the city may not stop by and stop you, Mr. Solomon, and say, hey, I'd really feel like our city's in shambles because we don't elect our mayor. I don't think anyone would say that. But they may also not stop you and say, hey, I think, we ought to have an extra column of windows. But, we know ultimately that if they were asked, hey, do you like this one over that one? They probably would say, yeah, I'd like the windows, right? And so that's why we all kind of make those decisions. In this particular case, it's not like we're changing the whole world of Richardson. All we're doing is just changing one small portion that, quite frankly, in some instances is kind of an unfair thing to ask a brand new council. To Scott Dunn's point earlier, Councilman Dunn mentioned, today he has a pretty good feel for the council, but the fact of the matter is 1 week in, after just being elected, you may not, and not to speak for you, but people may not necessarily already have that sense for each other because they haven't had a chance to work with each other. So, it's for all those reasons that I'm going to be in support of this. I think it's a little bit of a cop-out if what we do is we say, hey, let's vote on it based on can it be ready in May. At the end of the day, we put it as a short-term action item to discuss it in time for a May election, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the May election is the end of the world. And so, whether it's a May election or a November election, I think it's important that when we vote, that we consider at least stating, is this something that we're saying directionally we do not believe the residents should vote? And that's it. So from my perspective, I believe, before we take this vote, I believe the residents should be able to vote for their mayor. It's something I said, when asked during campaign, and it's something that I continue to say.
Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Maczka, a second by Mr. Hartley. And you want to restate the motion that is to cease?
To cease the discussion.
To cease?
To cease the discussion. Oh, my iPad's gone. This is the problem with technology. It times out. Basically, I move, I'll just go from my memory. I move that we cease discussion of election versus selection of the mayor in time for the May 2012 ballot.
It means taking no action on it.
Taking no action.
Okay. All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed? That carries 6-1 with Mr. Omar voting no. Okay, now then we'll go on into whether we're going to have a charter review or not.